Hi guys, this is my presentation on rheumatic fever for Dr. Cody's immunology course. So I wanted to give you just a brief overview of what we're going to be looking at here, and I'm just going to hop right into background. So to understand rheumatic fever, you first have to understand rheumatism. So rheumatism is basically any disease that has inflammation and pain in the joints, muscles, or fibrous tissue, um, and most commonly is associated with rheumatoid arthritis. But that isn't the only one. We have rheumatic fever, and rheumatic fever is an autoimmune, multi-organ inflammatory disease. So that word rheuma is the Greek word for stream because they noticed that the blood flow kind of had an ebb and flow to it whenever people had this sickness. So if the Greeks knew about it, it's definitely a disease that's been around for a really long time. And in terms of the causative agent, it is Streptococcus pyogenes, which we all know her. It is strep throat, yes. And in terms of the bacteria characteristics that it is gram-positive, which means that it has a thick peptidoglycan cell wall. It's aerotolerant, which means it can survive in both oxygen-rich and oxygen-poor environments, and it's not motile, so there's no flagella to get it around. It has to move with the aid of something else. And in terms of the shape, obviously it's a cocci, so it's circular, it's spherical, and it generally will reside in those chains that you see here. So a brief interlude. The reason I chose this was because I have had a lot of experience with strep. When I was a teenager, I had strep throat 4 times in 2 months. Yes. Anyway, when I went in to see my doctor, he told me that if I got strep throat one more time, I would need to get my tonsils removed. I haven't gotten strep throat since. I was terrified. um, but I always kind of wonder, like, why would I need to remove a healthy part of my body to stay healthy? And the reason why is because the bacteria, the back of your throat is a perfect place for it to be because it's not motile, so that cilia really helps it, survive. And then also, it's aerotolerant, so it really doesn't really care where it is as long as it's happy. And so you have those cushions in the back that that it's just residing on. So if you remove those, it makes it less comfortable. So yes. In terms of the pathogenesis, it starts basically like if you have a sip of water from a friend's glass who got diagnosed with strep, 3 days ago, right? They're still contagious. So that bacteria enters your body and it has an M protein that it has on its cell wall, and an antigen will come, recognize it, trigger an immune response, and antibodies will flood the scene. That's all well and good, right? Everything up to that point, the immune system is functioning well. However, it's an autoimmune disease, so we know that something has to go awry. What happens is that M protein on the cell wall of the bacteria looks very similar to the proteins that are on your own healthy cells. And so that's called molecular mimicry, right? Because the antibody, are going to attack both of those things. So it's really hurting you and causing a lot of inflammation in your body. So with that molecular mimicry, that's a type 2 hypersensitivity response, right? So it's going to be IgM or IgG. That's going along with the CD4 and then the T helper 2 cell, and that's going to make a humoral response leading to the B cells then signaling antibody dependent cellular toxicity, right? And how all of that's going to play out is the inflammation. You're going to see a lot of the fever. You're also going to see some skin lesions, and then also when the antibodies go places that they're really not supposed to go, for example, like in the neurons, then you're going to get things like chorea, or if they go to places like the heart, then you're going to get carditis. And to talk more about those symptoms, these are what they are. So the reason I have Jones criteria with a question mark is that's what all of these symptoms are categorized as. So when you go into a doctor, they're going to diagnose you either with 2 major or 2 minor, and that you had a history of strep throat. So these were the criteria that they used to use. These criteria, though, came out in the 1940s, and since then they've been revised multiple times because there were many issues where people were using this in certain countries and they misdiagnosed many patients, and their numbers went up because they were missing some of the minors because the Jones criteria didn't have them. So although it's not the most reliable source, for the purpose of this video, all of these symptoms are all valid. So we have polyarthritis, right? And that's one of the more common ones that we see. It's going to be migrational inflammation, kind of like in your shoulders and your hips, the larger joints. You're going to have carditis, which is the heart, which is a very serious one, and I'm going to talk about that in the next slide. You have subcutaneous nodules, which is what we see over here, which is just the buildup right underneath your skin. Then you're going to also have this one right here that I'm not going to try to say, and it's basically these ring formations on your leg or anywhere on your skin. And the one that I think is particularly troubling is the Sydenham chorea, and it's that's when those antibodies that were attacking the neurons, that's what's going to cause this. And it's essentially that your body just starts spazzing. And I think that spasms on any person really is very tragic because it shows just the lack of control of their body. However, in children, I think that is particularly moving to see. So in terms of that carditis, so this is essentially what happens if you have rheumatic fever and it's prolonged and you keep on getting exposure to the bacteria, then that's going to lead to fibrosis. And then that will eventually lead to heart failure, which is the leading cause of death for rheumatic heart disease. So essentially what's happening is that the inflammation is essentially eating away at the cell, like the cells in your heart, which is bad for all the reasons that you think it is. It can cause multiple things, right? So it can cause the valves to go backwards, and essentially the blood is called regurgitation. The blood will just go the opposite direction. That's not good. It'll also cause the valves just to not work properly because they're just kind of here and they get so much inflammation that it can't really properly open and close. You're also going to have on the outside of the wall of the heart itself, that starts getting so inflamed that it can't properly pump. So you're not getting enough blood flow in your body, which again, all of those things are very bad. And those are all things that can lead to death. So who is at risk? It's 3% of the population, which may not seem like a lot, but it is. And the people who are at risk are usually in the younger age range, so it's ages 5 to 16 years old. Also, if you're a female, you are 2 times more likely to get it. If you had a history of strep, that also puts you in this at-risk category, or if you live in an impoverished or overcrowded area. So these are most common in India, the Middle East, and parts of Africa. And in terms of treatment, we don't have a vaccine for it. Trust me, if there was a vaccine for strep throat, I would have gotten it. So the main thing that we use is penicillin. For people who, penicillin can be used in 2 ways, right? So it's either if you have strep throat and you get rid of it using penicillin, or it's that you have rheumatic fever and, like, again, you just want to use it to get rid of it. Excuse me, there were 3. The third is that if you've had rheumatic fever and you have a high propensity of coming in contact with the bacteria over and over again, which would put you in line for getting rheumatic heart disease, then you get recurrent, essentially antibody boosters that are going to keep you safe for an extended period of time because you get them so frequently. And generally those have penicillin in them. Yeah, and then in terms of prevention, it's really the basic things, right? So like awareness and washing your hands and all of that we see now in the media because of COVID-19. But really, I think that the way that we're going to get around this and how we're going to fix it is by advocacy and research like we see here, because I think now more than ever we can all agree that we can't just turn a blind eye to diseases just because they're not in the US. That 3%, even though we can't see it, someone else is really hurting and someone else is really suffering because of that. So I think with COVID-19, none of us really even paid attention to it before it hit our favorite vacation spots, um, which I think that's really troubling. So yeah, I think that there is definitely still hope. Rheumatic heart disease death rate has reduced by 48% in the past 25 years, which is really good. Yeah, in 1990, it was 9.2 per every 100,000 people. And then now, recently in 2015, it's been now 4.8 per every 100,000 people. And that is a huge improvement. And we can go much further with that. Um, so, with that being said, thank you so much for your time. And these are my sources. And I look forward to answering your guys' questions on Friday. All right, bye guys.